This happened back in late 2009 when I was just 10 years old. At the time, I lived in a small town in Sweden with my mum and stepdad in a pretty big house. The house wasn't isolated or anything. You could be upstairs and still hear what was going on in the kitchen. That night, my parents were going to visit my grandma, and I really wanted to stay home alone. You know how it is when you're 10. You think you're way too grown up for a babysitter. After about an hour of me begging, my mum finally gave in, but made me promise to keep the doors locked and not open for anyone. I was feeling pretty proud of myself, sitting in the living room watching SpongeBob and eating a big bowl of ice cream. It was the perfect night until I heard this quiet knock on the front door. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe I imagined it. I kept watching TV, but then, about 5 minutes later, there was another knock. This time, it was louder. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I just sat there, staring at the door, my heart pounding. The knocking lasted about 30 seconds, then suddenly stopped. The only sound left was the TV. Trying not to freak out, I grabbed my phone and called my mum. She told me to go to my room, lock the door, and wait there until they got home in about 20 minutes. I did exactly that, but I left the TV on in the living room, figuring it would make it seem like someone was still out there. I sat in my room trying to calm myself down when someone started banging on the front door. Not knocking, banging. My stomach dropped. I couldn't move. I just sat there, completely frozen. Then, after what felt like forever, I heard the worst sound imaginable. The lock on the front door turning. Someone was inside my house. I covered my mouth, trying not to make a single sound. I could hear footsteps moving through the house, slow and heavy, and then, suddenly, the TV turned off. My stomach was in knots. The house was completely silent now, except for the footsteps that were getting closer to my room. Then they stopped. A few seconds later, knock, 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 right on my bedroom door. A raspy old man's voice whispered, "Let me in. I have something for you." I lost it. I started screaming and crying, yelling for my mum. The doorknob started rattling like crazy. He was trying to get in. I pushed my body against the door, as if that would do anything. My whole body was shaking, and I had no idea what to do. Then, through my window, I saw headlights. My mum and stepdad were pulling into the driveway. I bolted to the window, threw it open, and screamed, "There's a man in the house." My stepdad didn't even hesitate. He sprinted straight to the shed, grabbed his axe, and charged inside. The second the man heard him, he bolted out the back door, disappearing into the night. My stepdad ran after him into the street, but the guy was gone. By the time he got back, I was still a sobbing mess, and my mum had already called the police. They searched the area, but they never found him. We never figured out who he was, how he got the door unlocked, or what he wanted. So, this happened when I was living in my old apartment, which wasn't exactly in the best neighborhood. It was a ground-level unit, and my bedroom window faced this sketchy back alley with a dumpster that was basically a hot spot for homeless. people looking for scraps, not exactly the most comforting setup. But I had lived there for a while and was used to it. One morning, just before dawn, I was fast asleep when I suddenly heard this light tapping on my window. At first, I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the wall, my heart starting to race. It was still dark outside, and my bedside lamp was on, meaning that whoever was out there could see me perfectly through the 6-inch gap in my crappy old blinds. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a tree branch or even a bird, but deep down, I knew better. Then the tapping came again. That S when reality really hit me. Someone was standing outside my window in the middle of the night, just watching me. How long had they been there? And more importantly, why were they tapping? My mind went straight to the worst-case scenario. Maybe one of the homeless guys had gotten aggressive. Or maybe this was someone who wasn't just passing through. Something in my gut told me not to turn around, not to give this person any confirmation that I knew they were there. I felt like if I locked eyes with them, something bad would happen. So, instead of panicking, I forced myself to sit up slowly, rubbing my eyes like I had just woken up. I made it seem like I hadn't heard anything at all. Then, as casually as I could, I stood up and shuffled toward my bedroom door, acting like I was just heading to the bathroom. The second I was out of their line of sight, I booked it to the phone. My first instinct was to call 911, but at the same time, I was debating whether I should just grab my keys, throw open the front door, and run. But then, what if the guy chased me? What if I couldn't outrun him? Before I could decide, I heard it. This loud pop. My window was being forced open. I thought my heart was going to explode right then and there. At that exact moment, I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. My neighbor Mike was coming down. Mike was a big dude, and I had heard from someone that he was trained in martial arts or something like that. I cracked my door open just enough to see him and whispered for help. Without even hesitating, Mike took off toward the back of my apartment to see what was going on. The next thing I heard was pure chaos, grunting, a loud thud, bushes rustling. Someone got thrown against the wall, then silence. A few moments later, Mike came back around to my door, looking completely unfazed. He just nodded and said, "Don't worry, you won't be seeing that guy again." At first, I assumed it was just some random guy from the alley, maybe a desperate homeless dude. But then Mike told me something that made my stomach drop. The guy hadn't run off into the night like some vagrant. He had bolted to the front of the building, jumped into a red sports car, and sped off. And trust me, this neighborhood was not the kind of place where people drove red sports cars. When the police showed up, they pretty much confirmed my worst fear. This wasn't some random drifter looking for a place to crash. This was someone who had been watching me, someone who had likely seen me somewhere and followed me home. To this day, I still don't know who he was or what he really wanted. But knowing he went through all that effort to find out where I lived here, I never slept with my blinds open again after that. When I was about 13, I lived in this house that had a balcony connected to both my mum's bedroom and mine. It wasn't super high up, and there were these two big trees right next to it. one of which I actually used to climb up and down like a little escape route. The balcony faced the street, so at night the streetlights would shine through my thin curtains, casting all sorts of weird shadows in my room. One night I was home alone, just lying in bed, reading with a dim little booklight. My mum and brother were out, and I was enjoying the peace and quiet. That was until I heard something rustling in one of the trees outside. At first, I didn't think much of it. We had a ton of possums and bats in our area, so weird noises weren't exactly rare. But then I saw it, a shadow, a person, slowly moving past my glass doors. I immediately shut off my reading light and just froze. The figure was tall, way too tall to be one of the neighbor kids, and definitely not my mum, who's barely 5 feet. They were moving in this weird, careful way, like they were trying not to be noticed. My heart was pounding so hard I swore they'd hear it. The worst part, with the streetlights behind them, I could see them clear as day, but they probably couldn't see me. I just sat there, not even breathing, hoping they'd go away, but they didn't. A second later, I heard the sound of a door handle rattling my mum's glass doors. Someone was trying to get inside. My mind raced. Had she locked them? I had no idea, and I was too scared to move, but I had to. I forced myself to get up as silently as possible, tiptoed to my bedroom door, and locked it. Then I just stood there, listening. The person kept messing with the handle, but it didn't sound like the door was opening. I felt a tiny bit of relief, thinking, okay, they'll realize it's locked and just leave. Right, wrong. I heard slow footsteps move across the balcony toward my set of glass doors. The shadow stopped right in front of them. I could barely breathe. Then I saw it, a hand dark against the glow of the streetlights, reaching for my door handle, and that S. When I realized something terrifying, I'd been out on the balcony earlier that day. Had I remembered to lock the door, my stomach dropped. Those few seconds before he actually tried the handle felt like forever. I just sat there, mentally begging the door to stay locked. Then, click, click, the handle turned, but the door didn't open. It was locked. I let out the softest breath of relief, but even that made me panic. What if he heard me? The guy didn't leave, though. Instead, he started pacing the balcony like he was thinking. I had no phone, since my mum didn't think I needed one yet, and the landline was all the way at the other end of the house. There was no way I was moving. I just stayed glued to my bed, silent tears running down my face, praying he'd go away. Then he stopped walking, and in the eeriest, most casual voice, he said I could just break the glass. You know, my whole body went cold. He knew I was inside. I was trapped, and I had no idea what to do. Then, just as I was about to completely lose it, I saw headlights turn onto our street. A car rolled up to our front gate and stopped. My mum was home. The second those lights appeared, the guy bolted. I heard a heavy thump as he jumped off the balcony, and by the time my mum walked inside, I was hysterical. I could barely even get the words out, but eventually she understood and called the police. They never found him, But later, one of our neighbors told the cops they'd seen a truck parked on our street earlier that night. It matched the description of a vehicle that had been reported for attempted child abductions near my school, just a block away. Since I walked to school alone every day, the police believed he had been watching me. Maybe he followed me home. Maybe he had been waiting for me to be alone. I'll never know for sure. This happened back in the early 2000s, when I was about 12. My dad had passed away a couple of years earlier, leaving just my mum, my sister, and me to help me cope. My mum let me adopt a dog, something I'd always wanted. At the shelter, I spotted a small shepherd husky mix curled up in the corner of his cage, and I knew right away he was the one. A year later, he was a full-grown 90-pound beast and my best friend. My mum worked night shifts, and my older sister, taking full advantage of that, would go out and leave me home alone. I actually didn't mind. When she was home, she tried to act like my second mum, bossing me around and making me go to bed early. Our neighborhood was a quiet, middle-class suburb where crime was rare, so being alone at night wasn't something that scared me. One night, I was in the living room playing video games when I got up to grab a drink from the kitchen. As I passed by the back door, I glanced outside and saw that the garage was wide open. Thinking I had just forgotten to close it after putting my bike away, I didn't think much of it. My dog was in the basement, sprawled out on the cool floor, his favorite summer hangout. So I didn't bring him with me when I went outside to shut the garage. I stepped out the door and got about 5 feet before something in the darkness caught my eye. A shadow, crouched low, moving inside the garage. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. At first, I couldn't make out exactly what I was looking at, but then the figure stood up, and he turned to face me. Every muscle in my body locked up. My stomach dropped. The porch light above me cast a glow on the backyard, making it clear that this guy could see me. And then he ran straight at me. I couldn't even scream, just let out this weird yelp, half shock, half terror. But that tiny sound was enough. Behind me, I heard the deep, rumbling growl of my dog. Before I even had time to react, he was already at my side, snarling with bared teeth. The guy skidded to a stop. He hesitated for just a second, and that was all my dog needed to charge. The guy turned on his heel and bolted for the fence, with 90 pounds of pure fury right on his heels. He barely managed to scramble over the 4-foot fence before my dog could reach him. My dog stood at the fence, still growling, while I stood on the porch, still processing what the hell just happened. After a few seconds, he came running back to me, his whole body still tense, like he was ready for round 2. I didn't waste any time getting us both back inside. I locked every door, barricaded myself in, and just sat there shaking. For some reason, I never called the cops, never even told my mum or my sister. But I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Whoever that guy was, he had to have known I was home. The lights were on. The blinds were open. So why take the risk of breaking in when it was obvious someone was inside? The next morning, after my mum got home, I finally went outside to close the garage. That's when I saw what the guy had been messing with. My dad's toolbox. I locked up the garage, went back inside, and never said a word about it. Later that day, I took my dog to McDonald's. I bought him a burger and an ice cream cone because, as far as I was concerned, he had earned it. This happened when I was about 12 during the summer. My parents had gone away for the weekend to our house in Cape Cod, which was only about 2 hours away, so it wasn't a big deal for them to leave me home alone. My mum had made some food for me to heat up, and I had some money in case I wanted to order pizza, so I was all set. The first night alone, I stayed up playing Xbox until 3 a.m., which meant I woke up really late the next day. When I finally woke up, it was already past 1 p.m., and I remembered I had plans to meet my friends for some street hockey at 3. Till half asleep, I dragged myself into the shower, and when my parents weren't home, I really took my time. I was in there for about 45 minutes, just scrolling through Reddit and Twitter, when I heard the sound of my back door opening. It was loud. Our house was old, and that door always made a distinct creaking noise when it opened and closed. I instantly froze because I knew I was supposed to be alone. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, or maybe my parents had come home early. So I turned off the shower, wrapped a towel around myself, and cautiously made my way down the stairs. The way my house was set up, the staircase leading down to the kitchen was tight and walled in, so I couldn't see into the kitchen until I was almost at the bottom. Every step on those old wooden stairs creaked like crazy, but I took my time, moving as quietly as I could. By the time I reached the second to last step, I paused. I told myself I was being paranoid. If someone was in the kitchen, I would have heard more movement by now. With that thought, I shook off the nerves, chuckled to myself for being dramatic, and casually stepped down the last 2 stairs, turning the corner into the kitchen. That's when I saw him. A man standing in the middle of my kitchen, completely still, staring directly at me, and he was smiling. Not just a normal smile, this huge, unnatural grin stretched across his face. But what stuck with me the most wasn't his expression, it was his arms. They were twisted in the weirdest way, almost like they were bent backward at the elbows, held slightly behind him, like he was some kind of broken doll. The way he stood, completely frozen, staring at me like the tit was the most wrong thing I had ever seen. My brain couldn't process what was happening. My body moved before I could even think. I stepped forward and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, my fist colliding with his face in a half-punch, half-push motion. He stumbled back, but I didn't wait to see what he did next. I sprinted up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen as I ran. I flew into my room, slammed the door shut and locked it. Then, just like in the movies, I grabbed a chair and jammed it under the doorknob. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I was going to pass out. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Barely able to get the words out as I told the operator what had just happened. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The light coming through the gap under my door disappeared. He was standing right outside my room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just sat there, curled up on the floor, staring at that tiny strip of darkness where the light should have been. I could hear the faintest sounds of movement, little shifts in his stance, the creak of the old wooden floorboards as he stood there, just waiting. The 911 operator was still on the phone, asking, "Hello, sir, are you still there?" But I couldn't respond. I didn't dare make a sound. After what felt like forever, the light under my door returned. I heard slow, quiet footsteps moving away, one by one, down the hall. Then silence. Minutes passed. I stayed there, frozen, unable to do anything. And then banged the front door, the sound of officers storming inside. I ran out of my room and practically collapsed when I saw 2 police officers standing there. I don't think I've ever felt so relieved in my entire life. My parents never left me home alone again after that. To this day, I check every single lock in the house before I go to bed. I still get nightmares sometimes, and I feel my heart race whenever I see someone standing still, just staring. The worst part, even after working with a sketch artist and looking through lineups, the police never found him.